Hi, this is Susan Stageman, and today I'm going to be interviewing, actually, John Gioffredi is actually interviewing himself. He's a criminal defense attorney here in Dallas, Texas, and he is the criminal defense attorney in Dallas, Texas. He's going to be talking today about DWI specifically. I know John personally from a number of venues, done some trial consulting with him, and also know him through some networking venues, and he's got a lot of great information about what to do if you get caught by one of our local gendarmes. So, John...
French?
Just a little, that's what I call them. Just a little bit about your background. How long have you been an attorney, a criminal defense attorney?
Two different questions. I've been an attorney since 1981, criminal defense since 1984.
Okay. And how long have you been in Dallas? You've been in Dallas the whole time?
Since 1981.
1981, all right. But you grew up someplace else, didn't you?
I tried never to grow up.
I see. Okay. Anyway.
I was raised in Iowa, if that makes a difference.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it does, because I was raised in Iowa. In fact, we were in Iowa at the same time, although you were a lot younger than I was. Still am. So
I'm catching you, though.
Well, maybe, because I'm stopping.
No.
So tell us a little bit about, I know you do a couple of things. Obviously, criminal defense. You handle everything from murders to tickets.
Yeah, everything from traffic tickets to murders, although...
Yes, it's on horror movies.
A whole lot of more of the former than the latter.
And tell us a little bit, you want to talk about DWI specifically today. And so I'm going to basically, I know you love to talk.
I do.
You're a great orator. So I'm going to turn it over to you and give our viewers some ideas about what they can expect if they get stopped and what they can do.
Okay, well, basically, when I'm meeting people and they ask what I do, mostly I defend DWI cases. I find that interesting to do. I'm a social drinker. I go out and drink and drive quite a bit. It's not illegal, regardless of what the government tells you. There's nothing wrong with responsible social drinking. It only becomes illegal if you become intoxicated. Certainly there have been times where I've been intoxicated, and probably times where I've driven intoxicated, but that's not a good thing. But it happens to most drinkers at some point in their life are going to make that decision. But it's an interesting phenomenon because the officers are under a lot of pressure to make sure that they make arrests for people that are drinking and driving. Of course, they're told basically if they're not sure, I believe that they make an arrest if they're not sure, and they're almost always stopping total strangers, and they don't know those individuals. They don't know how smart they are. They don't know how coordinated they are, how well they respond to instructions. So they're making an educated guess as to whether or not they think the person's intoxicated. 9 times out of 10, they smell alcohol on someone. They launch into a DWI investigation, and they give people a series of tests, which, depending on your perspective, either are fair tests or not so fair. I think that they're extremely biased towards young people, being that young people generally have better reflexes and better coordination, and most DWIs probably happen late at night, and young people are probably better able to function at 1 or 2 in the morning than people who got a few years on them.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit. You mentioned something about it being a little biased. I mean, biased towards age, but how else? I know that you've talked a little. I've listened to you talk about this before, and you've said things. You've talked about, saying no to tests, and that. I mean, we're taught to obey what the police people say and ask us to do, and yet what you're saying is something different.
Well,
so
yeah.
Fill us in on that.
Police will take advantage of people. They take advantage of people's ignorance. I mean, most people don't know their rights, especially when it comes to criminal law. DWI is kind of an interesting phenomenon in that most crimes committed by low-class people, low classification, lower income. Yes, sorry, not low class. I know a lot of very wealthy low-class people, but but DWI is primarily an upper middle class and an upper class crime because the very poor don't have cars to drive in the first place, so they're never going to be driving a vehicle intoxicated. And even the lower middle class, they can't afford to be going out and spending $4.75 for a beer. You know, they're buying 6-packs and staying home. So usually it's the yuppies and the upper middle class and higher that end up getting DWI cases.
A lot of young people too. You know, we got a college town here.
It skews younger as well, younger people.
Yeah.
And like you say, most people will do anything a police officer asks, but I mean, and a police officer in that situation, they're going to get control of that situation. They're going to want you to do a number of things so that they can judge you based on those things.
Right.
But you don't have to do any of those tests. All sobriety tests are voluntary, but the police, even though they're trained that, and they will tell you that if you ask them point blank, they're never going to tell someone that doesn't ask them.
You have to get out of your
do
car.
Do I have to do this?
You know, I don't think you have to get out of your car, but they think you do, and I've seen what happens if you don't. So I'm just going to say you better get out of your car. There are a lot of things the police think they have the right to do based on this case or that case, and they're convinced they're right. And one of the things is they think that they can make you get out of your car on any occasion. And like I say, it gets pretty ugly if you refuse. So you're better off to get out of the car. It's safer.
Yeah.
But after that, you don't have to do anything.
Yeah. John, one of the things that, you know, as an NLP trainer, teaching people how people behave and how their brain operates to create those behaviors, police officers and oftentimes these types of service personnel are they're highly procedural. So what we know about procedural people is when they start a procedure, they have to finish it. And so I used to get very frustrated if I was stopped by officer for a ticket. I've never been stopped by an officer for alcohol because I don't drink.
Your time's
that much.
coming.
But no, because I actually don't drink that much, and I don't drink and drive. So, however, once they start that procedure, they just have to do it. So, if we happen to be stopped by someone, especially a DWI, we want to think about, okay, this is a procedure they're running, but we don't necessarily have to follow their procedure. Is that what you're saying? Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, essentially DWI testing is a police officer gets you to do a bunch of things that you've never done before, and they judge you based on that. You know, a lot of it has to do with balance, and if you have poor balance, you're probably going to fail.
Yeah.
And again, young people tend to, you know, they play more sports, they tend to be more coordinated, but, you know, people are overweight, people that are older, and people are just klutzes, they're not going to do well on those tests.
I'm kind of a klutz.
But the whole idea is you can just say no. You know, or say I'd rather not do those tests. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you could do it, but, you know, you're not going to look very good if someone on the spur of the moment came up and asked you to do a geometry test unless you studied geometry.
Right.
You know, they're asking you to do balance tests unless you've studied them and know what you're doing. You know, there's a good chance you're not going to look very well, and that combined with the odor of alcohol, you know,
they might ask you to do the alphabet backwards or something like that.
Well, that's kind of an old wives' tale. They usually will ask you to say a portion of the alphabet forwards. A lot of times they'll ask you to say like from the letter C or D to the letter like T or U or something like that.
So that presupposes that we know the alphabet, right?
Of course. Well, they usually, it's procedural, right? So
Right.
the first thing to do is ask you how much education you had, and then whatever you say, you know, 10th grade or whatever, you say, well, then you know your alphabet, don't you? And the person in court, well, sure, I know my alphabet. So they always get you to say you know it first.
So they back you into
and,
it.
you know, yes, if you've said the alphabet sometime in the last year or two, it's probably fresh, but, you know, if you're 40 years old and single and not a teacher, you've probably never said the alphabet in 30 years, and you might stutter on it. It's just, you know, things that, it's long-term memory. You don't always recall it properly. So
now, another thing I've seen them do is have people walk on the road line. Do they do that also?
Typically, yeah. There's three standardized field sobriety tests that they always do.
I've tried that. It's hard. I mean, in the middle of the day when I'm full of energy and under no, you know, adult substance, I find it difficult to do that. So if it were late at night and I was tired or it had a few adult beverages, I find it almost impossible. So
of course. And again, but the thing is, they're going to try to get, they're going to be videotaping you, and they're going to give you very specific instructions, none of which individually are very complicated, but they give you a series of several instructions, then ask you to, first of all, do you understand, which of course those instructions, like one of them, they say, well, keep your arms down to your sides, they'll demonstrate that. And then when they ask you to do something, a lot of people out of habit, when you're trying to keep your balance, you stick your arms out, and they're going to say, well, that's a sign of intoxication. You were instructed to keep your arms down to your side. But it's just habit.
It's a trick.
It's like a lot of times people, especially if it's cold, but a lot of times people, when they're standing, will put their hands in their pocket.
Well,
that's a no-no. Then police say, remove your hands, because supposedly you may be going for a weapon or whatever. Then when people are sitting there, they stick their hands back in their pocket again, and they'll say, well, that's a sign of intoxication because they're not following instructions.
Right.
I mean, anything you do that doesn't follow their instructions, they're going to say is a sign of intoxication.
Okay. So say, for instance, someone does get picked up, and then they say no, and the officer gets a little huffy. I didn't personally have this happen, but I had a friend of mine who refused to go along with what they said, and she ended up being taken to jail. So
that's one possibility.
That is in the clink. So tell us what we should do about that. I mean, obviously, we want to remain polite.
Yeah,
we don't want to get
yes.
belligerent about it if they ask us to do something and we refuse to do it. But tell us a little bit about how to handle that with a little refinement.
How much time do we have? There's really a 30-second answer and a 2-minute answer and a 6-hour answer. You can get into all sorts of details, but the 30-second answer it's the most defensive thing to do. It's just like any other lawsuit. A criminal lawsuit is just like another. The other side wants to get as much information as possible, and if you're on that side, you want to get all the information from them but not give them any. And in the context of a criminal case, like a DWI, you want to give them as little evidence as possible, so that would mean that you just refuse to do any tests.
Well, I think you assume that if you've had like a few drinks and you think you might not pass it, that you're just better off just saying no, 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 and...
Well, it's the more conservative action. It's not necessarily the right action. There are times where maybe someone's not intoxicated, and if they did the test, they'd be fine.
But do we have somebody?
I have a couple questions.
Oh, okay.
Questions from the audience.
First one is, can you tell people when they do say no exactly what happens to them as far as they get their license suspended and they're going to go to jail?
Yeah. Do you want me to know? You want the answer? Okay.
Well, I think that they should know that. You're telling people to say refuse stuff, which I agree with.
What do they expect to happen?
That they should know what's going to happen.
Okay. Well, there's a number of things that can happen, but again, we're talking like what is the best optimum long-term approach.
Right.
But if you refuse to take any tests, there is a fair chance that the officer is going to say, well, I don't feel comfortable allowing you to drive without having given you these tests. Can you call a friend to come get you? And we've had several people that's happened.
I'll call you, Travis.
Probably more likely than that, but it's not like it's a 99% chance, but probably 60 or 70% of the time they'll arrest you for DWI. And then if you refuse to take the breath test, they will initiate proceedings to try to get your license suspended, but that's not automatic. And at least if it's a first offense, you can always get an occupational driver's license to replace it. And of course, they're not going to tell you any of that stuff. They're not going to say that, hey, even though we're going to try to suspend your license, we may not be able to. We may fail in that attempt. And if we do take your license, you can, occupational licenses are routinely issued. They're not difficult to get at all. So if you refuse, we're not sure what's going to happen. It's going to be up to the individual officer. But probably, I think what happens usually is if the officer thinks you're wasted, he's probably going to make the arrest anyway. Think, well, he deserves to go through this. But most officers, from their experience, believe that if you don't take any tests, they probably won't be able to convict you. And a lot of them are just going to say, I'm not going through the paperwork. It's too much work for someone like that.
And can they draw blood? Can they forcibly draw blood? I heard that the other day, and I don't know.
Again, kind of a complicated question, but the current state of the law, apparently they can. I'm not sure that's legal. I think we need to challenge that, but they're doing it. Put it that way, they're doing it. Whether it's legal or not remains to be seen. But they don't do that very often. That may be done in 5% of the cases.
Right.
But it's done often enough that it puts the fear of God into people.
Yeah. Well, John, guess what?
Out of time.
We're out of time already. That was fascinating. So tell us how we could get a hold of you. Could I always say if I ever get picked up that my attorney says that I have a attorney on retainer, and I'm not going to do that.
You can say that if you want to. It's not going to make any difference whatsoever. But.